I think the biggest changes that I've seen have been around their instructional decision making in terms of what they choose to do in their instructional decision making, and also how well they explain why they did it, sort of the robustness of their explanation of their decision making. So I think the best way to sort of illustrate that is to give you an example from a class that I taught this past semester. And I think anybody on the call who's taught before will relate to this, because it's a story of how I had one thing planned and something completely different happened that my candidates took the lead in, and it ended up being a more powerful learning experience for them than what I had planned. So at the beginning of the semester, before I had candidates start to learn about learning science and specifically start to learn about paying attention to meaning, having learners pay attention to the meaning of to be remembered content, I decided to have students bring in examples of lessons and lesson plans that they thought would be high quality instructional experiences for middle grades learners, because these were all middle grades teacher candidates. And so everybody brought in a lesson plan or a written explanation of a lesson that they thought would be high quality and would lead to good learning outcomes. And I had the candidates unpack why they thought that was. And really the lesson plans that they had identified by and large were flashy, they were fun, they were hands-on, they were active. But as I anticipated, almost none of them were really grounded in this learning science principle. It had students paying attention to the meaning of important content. So my plan was at the end of the semester, after we had moved through this learning science unit, that I would have the candidates come back to those lessons and lesson plans and reanalyze them with their new information that they had about this learning science principle. But instead, what happened was in the middle of the unit, while we were just in the middle of a lesson in which we were learning about how we could design a lesson to have learners focused on the to be remembered content that was important, I had a candidate have a big eureka moment in the middle of our Zoom class. And she unmuted herself with great excitement and said, Dr. Dack, wait, now that I think about the lesson plan that I brought in at the beginning of the semester, I thought it was a really good lesson plan, but it wasn't. What I'm realizing was that the activity the students were doing doesn't align at all with what we're talking about in class. So I asked this candidate to explain to the rest of the class what the activity was and what she was noticing now about that activity. And she said, well, it was a middle school science lesson in which students were going to build a mobile of the solar system. So they were going to have styrofoam balls to represent different planets. They were going to label each planet, and they were going to include one fun fact about each planet. And at the time, when she first encountered this lesson plan, she thought that sounded great. It was hands-on, right? Great project for middle school learners to do. And what she said to her classmates at this point in the semester was, wait a minute, if we have students do that, they're going to spend 90% of their thinking time thinking about spray painting a styrofoam ball. And they're not going to be thinking about the meaning of important content. You know, that one fact they picked out about each planet might not even be important because it was just supposed to be a fun fact. And one by one, all of her classmates started thinking back to their lesson plans and having the same realization over and over. But I thought the most exciting part of the conversation was that at the end of that class meeting, students were raising points about how they had noticed in their own K-12 experiences that some learners might be more likely to be fed a steady diet of styrofoam ball lessons than others. So one candidate, for example, said, you know, in high school, I took honors courses and regular courses sometimes, and I feel like my honors courses were much less likely to have me work on a styrofoam ball activity than regular courses might have been. And so the class raised this question, is that really fair that some students have more access to the types of rigorous activities that we're talking about in learning science compared to these styrofoam ball activities? So it had important implications, I think, for my candidates in terms of thinking about learner outcomes when we make these types of instructional decisions as teachers.